We, whoops. All right. So we basically offer in our educational trainings different opportunities to learn more about the donor conceived person's community, especially children in our case. And this is part 4 of a webinar series on raising donor conceived children. So many people have spoken on our past panels. They have actually found out about their relationships and have met each other through the DSR, Donor Sibling Registry, which we're going to learn much more about. So I am super duper excited to introduce you all today to co-founder and director of the DSR, Wendy Kramer. And her son is here too, Ryan. He is a co-founder, and his half-sister, Jamie, who they found each other. You're going to learn more about that exciting story. We are going to hear a little bit about Wendy first. She is the co-founder of the DSR with her donor-conceived son, Ryan. And they created this to basically assist people who were conceived as a result of sperm, egg, or embryo donation who are seeking to make mutually desired contact with others whom they share genetic ties. They have more than 82,000 members in 105 countries. Impressive. And the DSR has helped to connect more than 25,000 of them with their half siblings and their biological parents. Wendy has listened to, advised, consulted, and researched thousands of these parents, donors, donor conceived people, and other donor family members. Wendy's also conducted many research studies. We'll make a link to this afterwards, and on all donor family members, and wrote many peer-reviewed papers based on them. She's contributed chapters to several books on donor conception and has reviewed abstracts for the ASRM, American Society of Reproductive Medicine, and beyond. Wendy was also an associate producer for the 2011 Emmy-nominated documentary Sperm Donor, and on the 2013 MTV News and Docs 6-part docuseries called Cryo Generation Cryo. And we had some of the other people on a previous webinar of ours who was also on that. So Wendy used a sperm donor to conceive her son Ryan in 1990. Ryan's connected with his bio father and grandparents and knows 23 half siblings so far, right? He can keep on going. And we're really, really honored that Jamie is one of them here today. All right, I'm done talking. I am turning it over to you, Wendy. Tell us your story. Tell us everything.
Hi, thanks so much for having me today. So let's see, the short version of my story is that I was married. My ex-husband had some infertility issues and we used donor sperm. Ryan was born in 1990, and about a year after that, my ex-husband and I split up. So he was completely out of the picture. And from that point on, I raised Ryan as an only parent. And so it was very obvious to him. He had one parent, just a mom. And then when he went to preschool, he saw moms and dads. And so one day he came home from preschool. He was 2 years old. And he said, "So did my dad die or what?" And there we were with the first conversation, very simple 2-year-old conversation about the sperm and the egg. He went on to ask me a question about a choo-choo train. That was the end of it, but it was a very important conversation because it was the cornerstone conversation that we then built upon, year after year after year. I had a very curious child. By the time he was 6, he was looking at me saying, "I want to know who my biological father is." And at that point, I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I done? What do I do? Like, of course you're curious, but we were not properly counseled or educated at the front door about a child's curiosity and, that innate human desire to know who and where we come from. So for many years, we had to wait for social media to be invented. And finally, in 2000, it was invented in the form of Yahoo groups. And we started a Yahoo group thinking, and it was exactly 22 years ago. Last week was our 22nd anniversary. And we didn't know, maybe Ryan's the only curious kid, maybe he's not, maybe their donors are curious. We had no idea. And so we started this Yahoo group, and within a couple of years, we started getting national media exposure, the Good Morning America, Oprah, 60 Minutes, all of that. People, I think up until that point, they didn't know that they had the right to be curious, the right to search for, and the right to connect and find and define these new relationships for themselves. So we just started growing and growing and growing. And as we started growing and growing, Ryan's family started growing and growing. And in 2005, he was the very first donor conceived person to figure out who his donor was through a DNA test. So he's connected with, a couple dozen half siblings. And then also he can tell his story about his biological father, and he got two grandparents out of the deal. And this expanding family for us, it hasn't always been easy. And sometimes the road gets a little bumpy, and, it's not always black and white. There's a lot of the middle ground of maneuvering. Who are these people and what do they mean to us, and figuring stuff out, and privacy versus secrecy, and all of these issues that we all deal with. But now, like you said, the DSR, we've connected just about 25,000 people, and we just every day we're matching people.
So I want to stop you there before we go to Ryan and Jamie a little bit. And one of the things that we got to talk about on our podcast previously, Fruitful and Multiplying, was really you being a trailblazer. Because in the 1990s, like you said, you were not given information to consciously know to be able to talk to your son, or how to talk to your son about being donor conceived. Can you talk a little bit more about your gut feeling or why you chose to be open?
Well, I chose to be open because I realized that even though my son was very young, I would expect for him to be honest with me. And then therefore, I also owed it to him to be honest to him. Respect and honesty goes both ways between parents and kids and parents. So it was my gut feeling. At the time I got pregnant, of course, there was no internet. There was one book out called Lethal Secrets that talked about kind of the dangers of not telling the truth to children about being donor conceived. And it really resonated with me. It made total sense. And therefore, I expected to tell Ryan a little bit later on, not at 2 years old. As it turns out, he kind of, grabbed the steering wheel and made that 2-year-old conversation happen. But I think parents need to know, don't wait. These, ideally, what I know now through research and 22 years of talking to donor families, is that the best time to tell is pre-verbal. Let it just be a part of the child's story from before they can even remember.
So just before we get to Ryan, one last question. You know, did you? I remember before having my third son, I made up all these stories in my head. I was so concerned about certain things. Those things didn't come to fruition. What were some of your concerns prior to using I guess, a sperm donor?
I really didn't have any, because I, like so many other parents who are in this position, I was so focused. We were told you'll never have a baby together. And I was like, damn it, I'm going to have a baby. And I was so driven by that. Just give me the baby and I'll worry about everything else later. And I think so many of us, we come from this place of desperation. We know we're meant to be parents. This is the only avenue really that's possible for us. And we don't do our due diligence in, educating ourselves like we should, because we're so desperate. We just give me the baby. I will worry about everything else later. And honestly, that's where my mind was at. I really wasn't thinking about my son, my future child, or what his needs might be, or his curiosities. I just was so singly focused on give me the baby.
I get it. I really get it. All right, Ryan. So let's talk. You are this famous, I mean, you were on Oprah. So who are you? Who are you today? And just tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, definitely. So my mom, Wendy, kind of touched on it a little bit, but I was curious from the very earliest time that I found out, which was quite early. I think, like she mentioned, she was a single parent, so it was only going to be a matter of time before I naturally became curious and started asking. And I think it was maybe a little bit earlier than she was prepared for at the time, but she did an amazing job to her credit in finding a way to kind of plant the seeds of understanding for in a way that a 2-year-old could understand. And really, I credit my what I consider to be pretty healthy attitude about it that I've had, for my entire life, to the fact that I was told very early. I've met, many, many, many donor-conceived people over the years who have, a lot of diversity in their stories and how they were told. And I think having it presented to me very early on in a very benign sort of way, not a good thing or a bad thing, but just like this is your particular story and how you came into the world. It was always something that I was very comfortable with and confident about, and was never a source of shame or really any negative feelings whatsoever. So I knew from a very early age, and yeah, I felt the curiosity as soon as I knew, and it I think was largely driven by just curiosity about myself. So as I was a kid growing up, you learn things about yourselves, things that you're interested in. The way that you look. I had this like very bleached blonde hair, which I didn't share in common with anybody on my mom's side of the family. Interests that I had or hobbies that I was interested in. I was curious about where those came from. I think it's a very natural part of the human experience to try to understand where you came from. And so having that curiosity very early on without, an immediate way to get those questions answered, that's what eventually, led us to starting the donor sibling registry. So, like my mom mentioned, we started it around the year 2000. And it grew really slowly at first, and then after getting some media attention in the first couple of years, it started to explode. And really, the intention was just to see if anyone else out there was curious or was feeling the same way I did. We didn't really know any other donor-conceived people at the time, so it was really mostly just to connect to see if anybody else was in a similar sort of situation. And eventually we discovered that not only is that certainly the case, but we also have built this organization that has matched many, many thousands of people at this point. So it's been really a fantastic journey. And through that, yeah, I have been able to answer all of my questions about my heritage and then some, both through meeting a number of my half siblings, of which, yeah, like you mentioned, there are many these days, and as well as meeting and building a relationship with my donor and his side of the family as well.
Can I ask before we get into all that, because I know that I have a lot of questions for you, so I'm sure we'd like some more details. But before that, you were how old again when you were starting to ask these questions and get answers? You were young.
I was 2 at the
You were
time.
two. Okay, so
Yeah.
maybe not two, but like let's say you're 6, 7, finding out more, going on TV, talking about it, really working with your mom on this project. How did you go back and talk to your friends at school about this, and what was their reaction to you?
Yeah. So my memories of my early childhood are spotty, so I kind of have to fill in with stories from my mom as well. But I do remember being very open and very confident about it, even as a very young kid. And there's a story where my mom brought me in to meet somebody in a business setting, some executive, and I walked in, I think probably as a 6 or 7 year old, and stuck out my hand and said, "Hi, I'm Ryan, and I'm a donor baby." And that's like probably pretty jarring for any adult, particularly if you don't really understand exactly what that means. But I think it just speaks to the fact that like I always had a very positive attitude towards it, and always, like I said, just felt quite fine and confident about it. And I think that that feeling that I had was perceptible by other kids around me as well. I think kids can be quite cruel, and they can find insecurities to make the center of bullying or being picked on. But I think this was always something that I was just so like okay with and confident about, that I was open about it with people at school. I never tried to hide it. I never really thought of it as anything that made me, different or special in a negative sort of way. And as a result, most kids, all kids, in fact, just were like, okay, and that was that. Occasionally I would answer questions about it, but just generally speaking, I had a pretty positive experience, like with my peers, all through my life.
And I bet maybe this is more of a question for Wendy, but I bet that your mom wasn't reading like children. Nowadays we have not nearly enough, but we have like children's books who can guide or at least start a conversation with a young child, with some really nice language in them to talk about, how perhaps you were conceived. I bet you didn't have any of that when you were young.
Yeah, no, not that I remember, and my mom can speak to this better than I can. But I think for the most part, she was just kind of winging it because there really was no information available that, a lot of which we have now. Like you said, not
Right.
enough. But at the time, yeah, she was really just doing the best she could, and kind of trusting her intuition. I think, yeah, the biggest thing I credit her for is just the decision to be completely open and honest with me. I think in general, if you're going to demand honesty and respect from your child, you have to give it back in return. And when it comes to something as important as your genetic identity or your genetic heritage, I think being super honest as early as possible is really, really super important.
I love that. Okay, so let's get into it. So you were looking for where you came from. Did you end up finding your, let's start with your biological father? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I had a few kind of near misses. Like we started the donor sibling registry in the year 2000 when I was 10. And at that point, I was, a 10-year-old kid. I had very, very little information about my genetic history, about the donor, about his side of the family. My mom had received a packet of information that had some non-identifying information like height and weight and eye color and hair color, and I think even things like what he studied in school, and a couple of long form, a couple of like essay questions essentially. But beyond that, I knew basically nothing about him, and like I said, I was really quite curious at that point. So when we started the donor sibling registry, it was I was super interested and hopeful that somebody would sign up, a half sibling, a donor, basically somebody who had this side of myself in common with me that I could relate to and get some of these questions answered. And over the first couple of years, we had some like near misses in terms of people signing up, it possibly looking like they could be my half sibling, getting our hopes way up, being very excited, and then being let down. So I think I had been through the ringer a little bit in terms of near misses and disappointments. And so I'll come back to the donor. I'll kind of answer chronologically how it happened, which is that in 2003, we were, like you mentioned, on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and that attracted a ton of attention to the website. It really was like a major catalyst in its growth. And there was just a flurry of activity. People were signing up at a rate we had never really seen before. And my mom then and to this day continues to be really like the only employee and driving force behind the entire thing. So she was kind of overwhelmed and answering questions really quickly. And she got one email come through that was just asking about whether or not that was her son Ryan that they had seen on Oprah today. And she just quickly responded yes. And we got this email back. That said, oh my God, like I have two of his half sisters. We were shocked. Again, we were really excited. We unfortunately quickly after that found out that although the mom had contacted us, the kids had not been told that they were donor conceived. So at that point, and even to this day, there was not and continues to not really be a path for us to actually meet because of that. So this was another kind of like checkbox in the column of like, this is why you should tell your children, this is why honesty is better. So near misses, things like that. And then eventually we did have the first like success story for me, which is that I found a half sibling named Anna, who is 3 years younger than me. She's actually got the exact same birthday as me, different year, but same day. And this led to a little bit of confusion when she first signed up, because we see new members and they put their birth date in and we're like, why is she putting your birthday in? And it turns out just kind of a wacky coincidence. But after, a few of these kind of like disappointments, it was extremely exciting. And so I think, as quickly as possible, we were able to meet in person and spend time together and get to know each other and like get a lot of these questions answered that I'd had for so long, for so many years. And it was really, really quite exciting at that point.
Tell me more those questions. I think we hear, or at least I hear more about mainstream adoption, and like you might hear of stories or people who feel like they've always been missing a piece of them or something. There was like a missing puzzle piece, and when they found their biological family, they were complete and whole. Is that the same kind of feeling that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what I have found in many, many years of meeting many, many people in a similar situation is there's kind of a spectrum of different feelings about it, and none of them are right or wrong. But on one end of the spectrum, there are people who feel so desperately that they need to understand where they came from and have their genetic identity like complete, that it does feel like there's a part of them that is missing, and they really don't feel like a whole person until they can fill in the answers to those questions. And then there's another end of the spectrum, which is also like, somewhat rare, where I think people find out that they're donor conceived and they feel very little curiosity. Maybe they don't care, or they're just not interested, or they have a great relationship with their parents and they're just like, it's just not important for them to know. Relationship with the parents, by the way, doesn't have any real correlation, I think, to how people feel. It's just kind of, it just ends up being kind of an individual set of feelings about it. I always felt somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, which is that I never felt like an incomplete person, or like I had a hole that was missing, or that I needed to be able to fill that to complete my identity. But at the same time, I was really, really curious to understand where I came from and why I was the way I was in many sort of ways. Like, especially as I got older and learned more about myself. I was one of the only person on my mom's side of the family that had a real draw towards like STEM, like the math and science type fields, and I ended up studying engineering. And it was such a big part of my life, and such like a big part of the way my brain works, and a big part of myself, that just wanting to know where that came from and understand why that was, and just basically be able to find someone that I could relate to with that half of my identity. It was really, really important. But like I said, never in such a way where I felt like I needed it to feel complete.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can tell you then the kind of story of meeting my donor, which happened a few years later. We had done a public records search. From the donor profile, we knew that the donor was probably born on a particular day. We knew roughly his birthday, and we knew very likely the geographic area that he was born in. It's a very, very large city. So we pulled from a public record search a list of all the males born on that day in that city. And we got a list of like, hundreds of names. And at the time, we mostly just did that out of curiosity and as a way to say like, hey, maybe this could be another piece in the puzzle.
And how old are you at this point?
At this point, I'm probably 12 or 13. And at that point, there was really nothing to do with that list at the time other than kind of marvel at it and say, wow, like I wonder if the guy's name is one of these names. But that list kind of went into a drawer for a few years until in 2005, genetic testing started to become available to consumers in a way that it hadn't been available before. And I put my DNA into a testing service. And one of the features of that testing service, as many of them offer now, is that it has a sort of relative finder feature where it shows you other people in the database that you may be related to, and to what degree. And so there was, at the time, a number of different markers, and the higher the marker that you match somebody on, the more related that you were. And at the highest marker they had available at the time, there were two names, and it was the same last name, different spellings, but it was the only two people out of their whole database that I was, the most related to that they could ascertain at that point. And that was enough to like pique our curiosity, say like, okay, this last name is of interest. So we thought about that list and went back to the list, and sure enough, there's a guy on the list with a last name that matches as well. And at that point, it was far from being certain, but it was enough to get us started on the like kind of sleuthing path. So we did some investigation into that person's name. We kind of had a suspicion about where he went to college and what he would have studied. And so we contacted alumni departments and said, did you have somebody by this name, graduated on around these dates? And that got confirmed. And we basically did this like several weeks long process of kind of filling in information, and eventually had enough confidence to say like, okay, we're pretty sure this is the guy. At that point, I was 15. I wrote him an email, basically said, I'm here, I exist, I'm really curious. I was really careful to explain what I wasn't looking for. I didn't want a dad, I didn't want money or any obligations from him. I really just wanted him to know that I existed and that I was really curious just to like see a picture of him or like hear the sound of his voice, or just like, I was 15 at the time. I want to know like what are his favorite movies, and does he like Led Zeppelin as much as I do? Like all, things that a 15-year-old would care about. And he wrote me back, and he was really excited to have been contacted. And it was a huge relief because I thought, he could be dead, he could have no interest. And so after he made contact, it was great. We exchanged emails for a period of months before he invited me to California to meet him and his parents, my biological grandparents. And that was really the start of this relationship that we have forged now over the last 17 or so years, getting to know each other. And I think over that time, like my relationship with him has been kind of unique. It's not like father-son. We're still kind of on first name basis. It's more like an uncle or like a cousin or even more like a friend. But the relationship that I made with his parents, my grandparents, really did feel more like actual traditional grandparent-grandchild relationship.
Did they
And that was
know? Did they
I'm
know
sorry?
that your donor donated?
Yeah, I think they had been told, at some point over the years, but I think I'd never really thought too seriously about it. And I think most donors are kind of coached by the sperm banks that they're promised anonymity in a way that really can't be promised anymore. And so I think the assumption on their side was that, maybe there are some offspring out there, but it's unlikely that we would ever get to meet them. So he didn't have any children of his own. He has one sibling who also didn't have any children. So when I found them, they were just absolutely overjoyed at the opportunity to have a grandchild or grandchildren at a point where they really didn't think they were ever going to. So it was a really, really overwhelmingly positive experience for me and really great.
I love that. Before we get to Jamie, because I know you have a lot to say, last question, Ryan.
Sure.
You ever talk to him about the reason that he wanted to donate or why he did that?
Yeah, and I think he also was asked this on the donor profile when he originally donated, and I think his primary reason is probably the same as it is for most college students who are donating, which is that it's really good money and it's really, really easy. And if you are trying to put yourself through college or through medical school, they deliberately advertise to young men, and they're like, come make $300 a week to do something you're doing anyway. And they kind of counsel them in a way that we think is not accurate or appropriate anymore, in that they say you'll be totally anonymous and you'll never be contacted, and we'll limit the number of offspring that you have to 5 or to 10, which is absolutely not true. And so, yeah, it's really easy if you're, a kind of naive 18 or 19-year-old college student to just be like, wow, there's no downside here and there's a lot of good money involved. And as an upshot, like somebody will benefit from this. Like I could actually help a family in a significant way as well. So yeah, I think he was interested in money and he was interested in helping people, as probably most donors are. And probably didn't think too much at the time about the long-term ramifications of the decision.
Wow. Thank you, Ryan. All right, Jamie, you are coming to this a little differently. Tell us how you found out that you are conceived.
Yeah, so my story reflects probably one of like hundreds of thousands of Americans and others where Ryan's talking about doing DNA testing in 2005, and that's great. And that's really early on, but there was huge explosive boom of just, let's do commercial DNA testing for fun when 23andMe and Ancestry came out. But just to rewind a little bit, I have a lovely family, a nuclear family of a mom and a dad and a sister, and, nothing ever seemed unusual. We looked enough like both parents that, we were supported and raised and loved, and, my parents are incredible people. But yeah, so it was not ever something that we considered, but I did have inklings growing up that, something just doesn't feel right with my family. I don't feel as connected maybe as I should, or sorry, I'm just kind of chasing the sun around here. I don't feel as, there were just things that came up. I'd ask my parents if I was adopted, things like that. But, at the end of the day, I go to sleep at night, I'd say, these are my parents. Sometimes genetics are weird, whatever. But then, yeah, 23andMe came out, and I never really had a strong interest in doing it myself. But my sister decided she got it for Christmas, just like a lot of people did. And just the idea of spitting into a tube, and 3 weeks later, you get your results on an app on your phone. And it's a really cool, colorful way, of seeing your, genetic wheel. So she decided to do that with her partner of the time, and came back with some really confusing results that, we thought that we were a very, like I said, nuclear, pretty small family. We are actually 100% Ashkenazi Jew. Both my mom and my dad come from a very small, tribe of Jewish people. And that's something that we were always raised with, our family story, Judaism, bat mitzvahs, we, connected through the Jewish holidays. So the first thing that came back that was confusing to my sister was that she was 49.9% Ashkenazi Jew. And, that's fine. That can happen. Maybe there's some confusion in there, but then the half siblings started popping up, and Ryan's name was he's like the ambassador of 23andMe for our group. So, when you pop up and see half brother, and our parents have only been married once, and, there's nothing that makes sense for, it became very confusing. So very quickly, she reached out to my parents, who actually were out of town, but a secret needed to be untold. And not only that, but my sister and I lived in different states. I live in Portland, Oregon. She was not here. So this story was untold to her. And she said, we need to tell Jamie right now. And Jamie knew also. Like, Jamie had brought this up over the years. Jamie, like, you guys made her feel crazy. Like, oh my God, it's an extremely shocking and jarring situation. There's no way to sit it. There's actually a funny story. When my mom came to tell me, it's a very serious conversation. I need to sit you down and tell you something about our family history. That's how she framed it to me. For some reason, I thought she was going to tell me that we were related to, like, Abraham Lincoln or something, and that, like, some big scandal was about to, like, come out about, like, us being like this, like, ancient.
Wait, how old were you again?
This was 4 years ago that I found out.
Okay.
Was, about 2018. Yeah, this is embarrassing. I was in my 20s, so I don't know why I thought that.
Thank you for being honest.
I was like, that's more likely than finding out, So it was a very difficult moment when that all came to light. Like, it just, it was. There's no words for that kind of shock. And I wrote down a note here that I just wrote. It's difficult and traumatic to reshape your identity in your adulthood, which is what I had to do. So once the news, came forward, it explained a lot of things, but there was also just a lot of other feelings around it. So I am a representative here of someone that's been, told in their adulthood, and someone that was lied to, unfortunately, about their family history and their family life. And it's a difficult thing to overcome, but I do always say to anyone who listens that there was, two sides of the coin. There's, betrayal and upset and difficulty, but there was also some really beautiful things that came out. And now we are a much more honest family. We have pledged to, go forward and be honest with each other. We've found out that there's different ways of loving that are not just biological and that are not, so I've had a lot of joy meeting my half siblings, getting to know Wendy and Ryan. So it's been a really roller coaster emotion, but yeah, I found this out in 2018, and I'm just a representative of a lot of people that this is happening to. So I'm happy to answer any questions about it too.
And I think one of the questions is, and we spoke about this before with Wendy, is, when you were born, I wonder if your parents were just doing what they were told and following the advice of the people around them.
Yeah. So they were. So that and I'm glad that I can be really open and honest with my parents in these discussions after the fact. But yeah, they were, similar to Wendy, just very desperate to have a child. My dad was unable to, and they, came to the decision of using donor sperm. And I was born in 94, my sister was born in 92. And back then, when you had a man and a woman in the picture, it was different for gay couples, where you'll have to explain the X and the Y chromosome and, how a baby is made someday. But with my dad and my mom, there was no research on raising children, with this information. And they thought that it would be very harmful to the nuclear family to pretend that, the dad wasn't the dad. And so they encouraged our family to lie. Not only that, but they gave a picture of my dad to the sperm clinic so that they could find a donor that resembled enough like my dad. And that's how they got away with the lie for 25 years. I mean, it's, we looked enough like a family that we weren't asking questions. But yeah, it's interesting. Another thing my parents asked for is they just wanted to make sure we had the same blood type. So that's really all they cared about, is look decent enough and have the same blood type in case one of us needs, a transfusion for an emergency someday. But other than that, they really, and I talk about this with my parents. I mean, when you're desperate, you don't know. They joked they could have had a black child. They could have had they just really had no idea. And we're really trusting the system. And that's crazy for me, a child of the internet and knowing so much, be like, you just put so much blind faith into this, sperm clinic. And they weren't even doing like enough genetic testing and stuff, of my opinion, back in the day. And like, really, people were lying on their questionnaires. And it's a little upsetting to know that now. But again, you just have to put yourself in what of the time they were being told, and we didn't have the internet, and we didn't think that you would ever be able to spit in a tube someday and mail it somewhere and find out who is your biological parent. So I did learn to give my parents a lot of credit and a lot of benefit of the doubt. And also a tough part about this is that my parents didn't tell anyone. It was a bonded secret between the two of them. So my grandparents didn't know, aunts and uncles didn't know. So when this news came out to my siblings, it was a very big family secret that was unleashed. And my grandparents, unfortunately, have since passed, but it was difficult for them. My grandma was like, my daughter was struggling with this. I could have been there for her, but it was just so like, my mom was just so protective of my dad, and she didn't want anyone to look at our family and think anything. And it was just so not talked about back then. And so I'm happy to be an advocate for it now, because like my life could have been so different. I do feel deprived of my ancestry. Something that was difficult for my sister and I was, we lied on our medical forms for years. And that's, to us, just unacceptable. Our father works in the medical field. It could lead to a misdiagnosis. We put, Alzheimer's, we put, all kinds of things that were not in our family line. So that's upsetting. And now that now that we know, we have gone to our doctors and said, this and that. So there are things like that that just can't be erased and can't be forgotten. But it is still possible to move forward on a new foot, to learn your new family, your new family dynamic, as well as learning about your other family that you didn't know about before. So that's been a really great experience through this as well.
I appreciate that. And so have you and Ryan met in real life?
We have, yeah. So it's really interesting is when I started being open on 23andMe and connecting to half siblings. I live in Portland. I found out about a half sister, 9 months younger than me, something along those lines, that lives in Hillsboro, Oregon, 20 minutes from me. So we started connecting, meeting up for dinner. We became very close. I love her. And she got married, and she had just a personal mission. She was similar to me. She didn't find out until she was 18, going to college. And so she was on a personal mission to meet as many half siblings as possible. Doesn't matter that we've never met. I want you all to come to my wedding. So she invited a big group of us, about how many, Wendy? Maybe 10 of us, 8, 9 half siblings. And Wendy was like, I'm renting an Airbnb in Oregon. And so we even had our donor come out as well. Lindsay, it was tough. She didn't invite him to the wedding because her parents are still a little, they're in. But we wanted to interact with Lance, and Lance was happy to come to the Portland area. He has some aunts that live out here. And so we interacted with him a bit before Lindsay's wedding, and we all had half sibling pictures at the wedding. And it was a really magical experience. It really was. I was very nervous to meet Lance, as an adult, and this is my donor. I didn't want to offend my father, who has done a great job of raising me, but this is important to me, and it was nothing but great experience. Just like Ryan said, I mean, obviously it didn't feel like I was with my sister, who I was raised with, but it felt like I was with close kin, like people that I wanted to get to know more, like people that I could have a good time with and we could share similarities and connections with. So that was a really powerful meeting.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful because you're adding people to your family. It might not look exactly like what you imagined. And Wendy, how do you say it? You say it so nicely when you talk about Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving meal phrase that you always say.
Right. It's funny. People always, they're like, well, you always tell all the positive stories. They can't all be positive. Tell us some of the negative stories. And it's like, it's people, it's families, right? So I tell people, look around your Thanksgiving table. Do you want to hang out with everybody there? Like, no, you want to hang out or spend time with the people that you're most like-minded or have similar interests or sense of humor, people that you live the closest to. Obviously, you're going to hang out with more. So there's no like nightmare stories, but just like in any family, like this is not different than family, it's family. So some people you connect with more. There's could be difference in with these families in socioeconomic, religious, political backgrounds, so you could be coming together with people who are very, very different from you. So in those cases, there just might not be an instant click, but a lot of times there is an instant click. And like Jamie said, you just feel like kin, some kind of kin, there's a connection. You look at each other's faces and you can see parts of your face in there. So DNA is not the only way to make a family, but it is one way, because if it wasn't, we would all give birth to our babies in the hospital. And when it was time to go home, we would pick a baby, any baby. But no, DNA matters. We want the babies we're related to, right? So you can't say DNA doesn't matter. It does matter. But again, not the only way to make a family. It's who we are is this wonderful and unique blend of nature and nurture. So it's the people that love us and raise us and take care of us, and our families, our communities, our teachers, our life experiences, and the two people that gave the DNA. All of that makes us who we are.
I appreciate that. We are going to do a demo in just a few minutes of the donor sibling registry, because we want to make sure that people understand it's no longer a Yahoo group, right? It's easy to use and accessible. But before we get to it, I see we have some questions coming in. We have a question about the ethical considerations of the donors. So Ryan was sharing that the donor entered into this agreement and an assurance of anonymity. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my opinion is basically just that when a recipient decides to receive donor sperm, when a donor decides to donate, everybody's kind of given these terms and they enter into this agreement, and they sort of know what they're getting into ahead of time. Whereas the offspring that's being produced, conceived, doesn't ever sign anything, isn't really able to, obviously. So in a way, because the donor offspring arguably has the most skin in the game, or is the most affected by the decision, in that they're the ones who have to, then live this life with, this potential curiosity. It basically defines their entire genetic identity. So that they're really like, significantly affected parties, and they haven't, been able to enter into an agreement with prior knowledge. However they feel about it, I think it's first and foremost important to respect their feelings and their wishes and their rights. So is it appropriate to tell an offspring that they can't search because their donor was promised anonymity at the time? I don't think that's fair or appropriate. That being said, though, I do think the right to search is absolutely there, and the right to make contact. Like I said, I reached out to my donor to let him know that I was curious and that I was interested and that I was there. But if he had written back to me and said, I signed up for anonymity and I don't want any part of this, and I'm sorry, I do think it would be right to respect that and not push any further. That doesn't mean you could never, reach back out. It's very, very common for feelings of donors, really of all parties, to change and evolve over time. A lot of times, like I mentioned, donors were 18 or 19-year-old college students when they donated, and then 5, 10, 15 years passes, and maybe they have a family of their own, or they're just at a different phase in their life where when they originally wanted anonymity, now suddenly they're feeling just as curious oftentimes as the kids are. So yeah, I think it is important to understand that they signed up for anonymity and be respectful of that if that's really what they want. But I think it is absolutely fundamental right of the offspring to search and make contact if that's what they want.
And I'm seeing a bunch of questions also coming in for the parents, some moms in particular. I think that there is a concern, whether it's a single donor or a double donor, you know, the fear of the child having perhaps anxiety or identity issues, even if you're open with them from the start. What are some things that a parent can do to calm these fears that their child might not be as strong as Ryan, or perhaps just grow up a little bit differently? I know that we have some books that we can share, but are there any other groups, maybe, Wendy, that you would recommend, or other websites or places to look to help normalize this?
Yeah, so I would recommend my book, Finding Our Families. It's the book that I wish somebody would have given me when I was beginning this journey. It's for all donor conceived people, their parents, the donors, other family members. And the main goal of the book was to normalize this for everyone and acknowledge that sometimes there can be bumps in the road. We can get over all the bumps in the road. Sometimes you reach out for contact, it's not reciprocated. Sometimes discerning between privacy and secrecy can be tricky. These are all things that sometimes it's complex with donor families. It's not straightforward, and there are things to figure out. But I think with the core belief and sort of tenet that honesty is there, and that you will acknowledge and support your child with whatever they need so that they're not alone on this journey. You're there as a team. That's what I did with Ryan. We were a team. When he said he was curious, I didn't tell him not to be, or that he shouldn't be, or those people aren't your family. I acknowledged, supported, I validated all of his feelings. I said, we're going to do this together. Whatever you want to do, I am right by your side. And I think those kids have the easier time when they can walk through this with their parents, so they don't feel like they're betraying a parent or hurting a parent by being curious. I think it's very important for parents to take their own fears and hesitations, work them out, go to therapy, do whatever they need to do, so that then they can be there for their kids in whatever way their kids need them to be there.
Yeah, I kind of want to add to that. In the aftermath of, since I've been finding out, my mom and I have always been super close like this. And something that she's done that's really helped me is that she is, we pledged open and honesty since then, but she's open and honest to answering any questions I have now after the fact. It's been, I was hidden my life, but now I can call her up and be like, I'm really upset today about this, and that. And I'm really, how did you come to this decision? One time I called her, I was like, you were pregnant with someone's baby that you had never met. How did you deal with that? What was that like? And so having her be open to me processing that and processing it with her has been huge, because sometimes even 5 years after, even 6 years after, I'm confused, I'm hurt, I'm angry about how you lied to me in this way, and having her be apologetic. Yeah, I'm sorry that we did that. That was wrong, and I know more now than I did then, and not making excuses. That's been very powerful for my healing journey as well.
I appreciate that. All right, Wendy, we're going to turn it over to you and your puppy to walk us through the registry. You have access to share your screen. And also, while you're getting set up for that, we do have a few questions about the registry and when is it appropriate for a parent, especially of a younger kid, to be able to search for biofam? Do we search now when I have a 3-year-old? Do we wait until the child learns about the DSR? Give us some timing. Wait, and you're still on mute.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So I think that, we have a lot of people that come to the DSR who are prospective parents. They're thinking about using a certain donor or sperm bank, and they come and they connect with people who already have kids from that donor, or, they want to know, because you will not learn from the sperm bank if there are medical issues. Coming to the donor sibling registry and connecting with families is most often the only way you're going to know if there are medical issues. You can get an idea of how many other kids might be out there from your particular donor. So people come before their kids are even conceived, while they're pregnant, when their kids are babies. And I think the thought is quite often, if my child could grow up knowing they're half siblings, why not? And I know all too often we have people coming to the DSR who are just shocked that they have these half sibling groups who they've gotten to grow up knowing each other. And then these new kids are like, well, they ask their parents, why didn't you let me connect with my half siblings and grow up with them? And there really is no answer, because the answer is, it's usually about the parents' hesitations and the parents' fears that they really could have worked through. So why keep your child from their genetic relative? Let them grow up with them. Why not? There are a lot of these beautiful relationships that are formed, when kids get to vacation together and, just get to know who each other is. So to join the donor sibling registry, you would basically come to donorsibling-registry.com. Way up on the top, there's either a join or a sign in button. So you would just sign in or join. And then you have a dashboard where you can, actually, I'm signed in as an admin, so that's not going to do you any good, but you can search the DSR even before you join or sign in. You can put in your donor number. Let's see, I'll put in my donor number. And you can say, I wonder if there's any other families here for donor 1058. And we can see, this clinic has a donor 1058. Then we can look at, California Cryobank has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 half siblings listed for donor 1058. I can see if they're males or females. I can see if there's messages. I can check the donor description. I can click on a username if I want to message a person. I can click on the little photo icon if I want to see the pictures they've uploaded. I can click on the little medical icon where only the families for that donor can share medical information with each other. So there's a lot of things you can do. You can read the success stories on the site, read from other people. What was it like to connect? And then we have a ton of information for prospective parents, for parents via egg donation, for counseling and counseling advice. I do phone consults all day long. So I'm not a licensed counselor, but I'm an expert in this area. If you want a licensed counselor, I can help pass you along there too. We have information for LGBTQ families and sperm donors and egg donors. We have information and advice on DNA testing, on which sperm bank. We have PDF files of user comments. The thing is, when you're choosing a sperm bank, the sperm banks, and the egg clinics, their websites are marketing materials. They are all too often not a clear indication of actually what happens with them after you conceive. So better to hear from people who have walked this path before you. You can read about us. You can read, we've conducted and published now more than 30 published papers in peer-reviewed academic journals. We publish the results everywhere. All the papers are readable by anybody. And so basically the donor sibling registry is connecting. We connect the people. But we're also about educating and supporting all those in the donor family. So my email is wendy@donorsibling.registry.com. Email me, people call me all day long. I'm totally accessible and ready to help anybody for whatever they need.
We appreciate this. We have many more questions than we're going to be able to get to, but I think two questions that we can answer in the time we're allotted. And maybe you can write your email address in the chat, Wendy, because a lot of these questions are for you. So, number one, is this site protected? Is the medical information and other information on this site protected?
Oh my, yeah, I work really, really, really hard to have our website protected. Nobody sees anybody's contact information or names or identifying information. The only thing that people see from each other is their anonymous DSR username. We have a messaging system. People can go on and message each other and send their phone number and their email address, but people are totally in control of their own information and how it's shared.
All right, and the last question before I'm going to thank everybody is I'm entering my number, my donor number in there, and nothing's coming up. How is that possible?
Well, you can email me and I can help you with that.
No,
But
specifically the question that I had asked personally, and I see it here too. Like, I have the number of the sperm donor, and I can't find any other siblings.
right. Well, there could be many others out there just like you, people who have not posted. They're lurking, waiting for the first one to enter their donor number. So I always tell people, you don't know if you have a match until you add your own posting, because who else is out there who used your donor who's like, well, I'm not going to post because no one else has. So you got to add your posting to really know if there's anyone else currently out there watching the site.
Amazing. Wendy, Jamie, Ryan, and Emily behind the scenes putting this all together. Thank you so, so, so much for your time. We had a really great turnout today. And if you have any other questions, please reach out to Wendy. And thank you all so much for being so open with us. We appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks.